Welcome in, everybody. It's time for another edition of the Football Diehards DFS show. We're with you every Saturday night at 9 p.m. Eastern. I am Jamie Calandro, your host at JAC3600, joined as always by my amazing co-host Eric Romoff at Fantasy Nav, Fantasy NAV. Eric, how's it going tonight?
It's going well. I'm excited to dive into the Week 7 slate. I can't believe that it is already Week 7. Right? We're at the midpoint for fantasy football seasons, and we've got another fun one. A little bit of a lighter slate with 4 teams on bye, but plenty of things to like about the DFS builds for tomorrow.
I know, right? It's unbelievable that it's at week 7. I always get a little depressed when the football season goes this quickly, but thankfully we have the extra week. We have the week 18, so we're not even at the halfway point now. So there's still plenty of football left to go. And you mentioned that it's a lighter slate, but that is true. But we do have an intriguing bit of bye weeks going on right now. And we're joined by Toronto Dave in the chat, one of my favorite people. Welcome in, Dave. Thanks for joining us. Yep, love Dave. On that note, if you're watching us live on YouTube and you have the questions, feel free to bring them in. We usually do a pretty good job of getting to all of them. That can be DFS, season long, whatever you want. But as I was saying, we do have an interesting mix of bye weeks on this one, where it seems like they kind of grouped a lot of top players at multiple positions all on bye together. So, at the quarterback position, we don't have Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts. And at the wide receiver position, we're missing Diggs, Kupp, and Justin Jefferson all this week. So this is really skewing ownership a certain way this week as far as those particular positions go. I know there's probably some running backs and tight ends, but I'm missing. But those were the standout ones to me. Are you approaching builds any differently in general this week before we get into the game by game, Eric?
Hey, honey.
I am, but not necessarily because of the teams that are on bye. For me, it's more to do with the specific matchups. There aren't a lot of very favorable matchups. There aren't a lot of very poor matchups, right? So it becomes much more of a point of emphasis on ownership in Week 7, and that quite hasn't been the case this year.
Yeah, it'll be a fun one, I think, for sure. So we're going to get right down to it. I mean, there's some good games this week, I think, as far as stacking from cash games from a few different perspectives. So why don't we get right down to it? We got 11 games. We've got a few that are pushing that 50-point mark and one that's going over it. And we're going to start right there because it looks as though there's some question marks going on in this game as well. And I'm curious on your takes as if it's changing your view on it at all. I, for one, am still pretty good to go forward with this game. And I'm talking about the Seahawks and the Chargers. One of the later games on the week. You got an over-under of 51.5. Chargers are sporting a healthy little 28-point team total. Seattle's defense has not been able to stop anybody. And the Chargers defense has not been as advertised either. So we do have a very, very important questionable tag on Tyler Lockett this week. If he doesn't go, that really changes the dynamic of Seattle's offense for me. Last thing I saw, he says he expects to play despite the questionable tag. So let's start with the Seahawks side. How are you approaching the Geno Smith, DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett trio before we get into the run game?
Yeah, it's really tough with Lockett going onto the injury report at the very late point in the week, right? Obviously reassuring that he says he plans on playing, but it does make things a little bit difficult to carry forward with confidence. In a vacuum, had this injury situation not popped up, I think Lockett would be one of the more popular options at wide receiver. He certainly would be, well represented on the cash game radar. Now that he's got that question mark, I don't know how many people are going to, feel comfortable waiting on that news, specifically with them being in the late slate, So that might actually open up an opportunity for him in the tournament world, right? If right now I'm seeing him 14, 16% rostered roughly. If people are a little bit sheepish and that creeps down to like the 10 to 12% range, I think there's some really interesting leverage with Tyler Lockett specifically. DK Metcalf, Geno Smith. I mean, Metcalf's rostership is going to go through the roof if Lockett is in fact ruled out. Geno Smith is fine, right? He's a decent little pay down option, 5.6K, good path to value. We saw last week in particular seemed to be in a very, very favorable spot and, didn't exactly set the world on fire. So, my expectations for Geno are tempered a bit. But overall, the Seattle side of this ball boils down to how much news we're going to have on Tyler Lockett before the 1 p.m. Eastern lock.
Yeah, me too. And I agree with you that my whole makeup has kind of changed so far. I had Geno in as my cash quarterback, and I had Lockett in as well. And with that news, I do still think Geno is fine as a cash quarterback, and honestly one of the better per dollar plays because his price just doesn't seem to move.
Yeah.
But I have kind of shifted the way of thinking of you as I took Lockett out of my cash build. I do really like him in GPPs as long as he's in now. Even if his ownership stays above double digits, it's not to the point where we've seen these last couple of weeks where he was the highest rostered wide receiver or among the top 2 or 3 highest rostered wide receivers. He and DK Metcalf are pretty much neck and neck in both targets and in catches and in yards and in touchdowns. So where are you in terms of DK Metcalf on this slate? Is he cash playable? Is he someone that you'd prefer to fit into GPPs only? How about Metcalf?
Yeah, I don't know if Metcalf is on the cash or in the cash player pool for me. The price tag is a bit of a consideration. Also, it feels like his productivity is a bit more lumpy, right? A fair amount of hit and miss, and whenever that's the case, that introduces risk that can really really crater your cash build. Certainly fine to be in a player pool for GPPs. I like overloading this game, specifically the passing game side of the Seattle Seahawks, because we'll talk about it in a minute. Kenneth Walker is probably going to be a very popular, if not the most popular, running back on the board. So, I like to try to get a little bit different by going heavy on the passing game side for the Seahawks.
Yeah, and I'll segue right off that to Kenneth Walker. I mean, he's pretty much locked and loaded in for me as a cash player right now at 5,800. There's really no reason. I mean, I'm trying to think back offhand. I can look it up while we're talking about it. I think he was the same price last week, or a few $100s cheaper. It's 5,400 against Arizona, but I mean, 21 carries. For 97 yards, which is 4.6 yards per carry, scored a touchdown for the second straight week. He even outplayed DJ Dallas in the passing game here. The Chargers have given up 5.8 yards per carry and the 4th most fantasy points per game to running back. Is there a scenario where you don't play him in cash? I'm locking him into cash. What about GPP also for you? Is he too high owned, or is he cheap enough that it doesn't matter?
He's a tough one in GPP, right? To your first question, yes, he is the leader in the clubhouse to be the running back favorite in cash games. For GPPs, we'll see what ownership does in the morning. Right now, I've got him north of 25%. That's almost close to an auto fade range for me, right? I'll certainly be underweight, but it's not to the point where I think you get a ton of leverage pivoting off him, right? The nature of this week's slate, the ownership is a little bit more spread out, right? So you're not shooting yourself in the foot if you roster him, but you do need to really put differentiation as a point of emphasis for the rest of your build if you are going to roster him in a tournament context.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with that as well. And you brought up the point, if it looks like the ownership starts to fade on the passing game, I think that's a nice little natural leverage play there, but I don't know if we'll see it that much. So we go to the Chargers side, and this is interesting too. They're tied right now with the Cowboys, unless I'm missing somebody. I don't think I am, for the highest team total on the slate. The Seahawks have been awful, for lack of a better word, on defense. I mean, just given what they've given up this year, the third most yards per pass attempt, third most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs, sixth most receiving yards. Every relevant stat across the board could lead you to stack against Seattle. But we do have Josh Palmer out with a concussion. We have Donald Parham out with a concussion. Keenan Allen, we talked about this. I was on this morning with Jordan Vanek of the 33rd team, and we were speculating that they would just hold Keenan Allen out through the Week 8 bye next week, especially since he's been talking about it. So if we see Palmer, Parham, and Keenan Allen out, that really condenses this passing game a lot. How are you approaching the Chargers, given Herbert's alarming lack of TD passes?
Yeah, I mean, look, we'll see this regress to the mean sooner rather than later, right? Um, the Keenan Allen news is really make or break for how you approach the Chargers side. Clearly, if Keenan Allen's out there, he should still be running a good chunk of his routes out of the slot. That is very much so the matchup that we want to and have continuously been targeting with the Seahawks, right? Lining up against Kobe Bryant, no relation. If he's ruled out, Keenan Allen, that is, DeAndre Carter becomes a really interesting piece for a pretty depleted wide receiver core, right? Through 6 weeks of the season, he's lining up nearly three-quarters of his snaps from the slot, so he would get that most favorable matchup. Right now, his rostership looks pretty low, right? 4 or 5%. I'm sure that would spike up a bit if Keenan Allen is ruled out, but it is that late game, so maybe not so much. I think I'm going to circle DeAndre Carter and plan to have a fair amount of him kind of in my skeleton builds as I head into tonight and tomorrow morning, with largely the intent of being overweight to the field on him, assuming, and I kind of subscribe to what you were talking about with Jordan, that we actually do see Keenan Allen scratch this game and get the extra bye week of rest.
Yeah, especially he's kind of like chirping about it too, which is an odd thing to see from a player. He's tweeting about his status on Week 8. So I don't know. I just don't see it. Gerald Everett is somebody that I really like. With Parham out, he's going to be on the field pretty much every down, and Seattle has given up the most yards to tight ends this year. So where do you stand on him? I think he's a really good GPP play. I don't really think he's going to fit the cash bill, because as we get through these games, there are several sub 3K tight ends that I think are the ones that you're kind of in your pool for cash. But where are you on Everett? I think he's got top 10 potential, maybe even in that top 7-8 range at the tight end position this week.
Yeah, I would think that he's closer to the latter, right? Flirt with top 5, top 8 kind of range. I
Mhm.
mean, he's seeing the field enough. He's involved enough in this offense. Again, we're both speculating that Keenan Allen will be out. So if that's the case, he should have a boosted role in this offense. And this matchup against Seattle is fantastic. The most fantasy points per game to opposing tight ends on the season. They're allowing essentially 2/3 of their targets to be hauled in. They've given up a fair number of touchdowns to the position. I mean, just everything that you would look for in a matchup for the tight end. And I do think that the Seahawks will be able to make a game of this one, right? So the Chargers are going to need to score in order to obviously get to that lofty total, but also to keep pace with the Seahawks. So I like Everett a lot. I tend to agree. I think on the cash side, he's going to go a little bit overlooked, just given that there are so many solid point per dollar options coming in for a couple hundred or $1,000 less expensive.
Yeah, that's a good one too. So I mean, before we get off this game, I want to talk about Eckler real quick. He's You could make a case that he's the top running back of the week, I guess. I mean, against Seattle, Seattle's allowed the third most fantasy points per game to running backs, 4.6 yards per carry, sixth most receiving yards out of the backfield, which is relevant since Eckler leads all running backs in catches. The price is getting up there. Is it one that you're getting to in cash? Right now, I'm not, and I'm feeling a little bit bad about it. Where are you sitting on that? And are you playing him in GPP?
Yeah, so I'm probably not going to get to him in cash, just given there are a few players that are a little bit less expensive that I think are a bit more consistent in their role in the offense. So
That's where I am too.
he'll be set aside for cash. Yeah, on the GPP side, he's kind of interesting. I mean, I see him. He's technically, I guess, the second most expensive running back on the board. He's the most expensive running back of the viable options. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. So generally the price king is someone that goes a little bit overlooked. But right now, I'm seeing his rostership flirt with like 15%. So if that's the case, I'll probably look away because I would rather spend up elsewhere because usually that's a good way to get leverage. If we
Yeah.
get to the morning and he's closer to that 8 to 10% range, I think he's fine, right? Really solid matchup. I would exclusively be looking at him in my Herbert stacks, specifically with the Chargers going quarterback, running back, and either a receiver or Gerald Everett is a texture that I find myself using a lot for these Chargers. Um, if I do some overload stacks, maybe he's on the run back side, or some overload Seahawks stacks, I should say. Maybe he's on the run back side, but ultimately, I think I'm only going to be using him if his roster ship slides down a little bit and where I'm stacking him with Herbert.
Yeah, and I like that QB running back tight end stack there too, especially as we've seen today. Mike Williams is gaining big time in ownership on this slate,
Hmm.
he's fine. He's fine too. I wouldn't argue with you if you played him. I'm not really going there at 7,200. He got locked down by Patrick Surtain, and I'm not saying that Tariq Woolen is Patrick Surtain by any stretch, but he has
He's
shown
not.
to be he's not. No, he has shown to be viable as a coverage corner. And I think Mike Williams is a good play, just with the target share that he could be getting this way. But I'm kind of with you that that's more the way I would lean with these Chargers stacks. Anything
The
we
thing
missed on
that's
this
that's
game?
tricky with Mike Williams specifically is like it's such a binary, right? Like if Keenan Allen's out, all of his projected ownership just immediately slides over to Mike Williams, right? So
Hmm.
if everyone is zigging in that context, that's where we got to zag and get a little bit of leverage.
Right, yeah. Yeah, the rate as which his roster chip percentage is creeping up is scary right now. If you're
Yeah.
considering him for those GPPs. All right, so that's Chargers Seahawks. That's one of the better ones to target on this. Before we get into our next game, we got a couple of questions in the chat that I want to get to here. A couple of
Get him.
season long ones. I missed one. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. So from Steven Crowder, one of our regulars. Thank you for coming back in. Here's an interesting one. Usually
Keep it
with
in.
these like kind of bottom of the bottom of the barrel plays, but this is a top guy here, and I'm curious to know why you can't play both of these, Steven. But half PPR, do I take Debo Samuel or CD Lamb? Cash. Oh, I'm guessing we're talking half PPR and cash. I'm guessing we're talking FanDuel here.
FanDuel.
So I mean, it says cash. Steven, you can clarify that in the chat if you want, but it says half PPR. Do I take Debo Samuel or CD Lamb in parentheses cash? So I'm assuming this is for a cash game build on FanDuel. You can correct us if I'm wrong. Um, I can take this first. For me, CD Lamb is the top receiving target for me on both sites. I mean, we're about to get into this game fully, but I really do like Debo Samuel in a projected shootout against the Chiefs. I think if Christian McCaffrey plays, that muddies that enough that it just solidifies Lamb. But I mean, for me, Lamb is a top priority at his price tag on at receiver on both sites. I don't know where you are on that. We can segue into that game in a second, though.
Yeah, I'm right there with you in lockstep. Dak coming back obviously has the arrow pointing up on this offense, and CeeDee Lamb has just such a phenomenal matchup, really, regardless of where he lines up, right? So, I would lean towards Lamb because I do think the waters are going to be a little bit muddied with CMC back there, right? They've got a running back who catches a lot of passes. They've got a wide receiver who they use as a running back. It's going to be kind of hard to decipher until we see really how they use all those pieces.
Yep, I agree. I think we're both in there. I do think Debo Samuel is an incredible play as well, but I think there's enough confusion there, and we'll kind of segue into that in a second because we're about to do that game. But we do have one more from Gitz. Dante Foreman or Latavius Murray? There you go. There's where we're really reaching for the top here. Dante Foreman or Latavius Murray? No indication on PPR, half PPR. So just kind of in a vacuum. Where are you on those two guys, Eric? I actually have that dilemma in one league myself.
I mean, I'm probably pretty close to a pass. Just bench all your starters and look on to
Yeah.
week number 8. Um, I mean, for me, I guess it has to be Murray, right? They're both in equally murky situations, but that matchup for Donta Foreman against the Buccaneers is just so tough. So I'll go with the Murray side against the Jets, but not really going to feel great about either of these options.
I agree. If you had to ask which situation I think is more visible, I think Foreman will get it is kind of you can I don't know you can bank I guess on a higher carry share for Foreman. I maybe even not. Murray, they're saying Gordon is going to start. I'd still go Murray. It's just a better matchup, but I'm with you there. That's a really tough one to put a stamp on there. But I agree that Murray is the play, and that's actually the way I've leaned in my league as well. That I have these two. That's half PPR. So neither one has any kind of projection in the passing game. So I think it's pretty steady either way, whichever the league setting is you go. That it's Murray slightly over Foreman for us. All right, thank you for the questions. Keep them coming. We are going to get back into our game by game here. And the next one will segue from that CeeDee Lamb question to Dallas Detroit. This one, Eric, for me is my favorite one to stack on the slate this week. Just from we spoke about this at length on this morning's show too. So I'm attacking it. I don't know about you. I'm attacking it from a Cowboys perspective, and there's a couple of reasons why. First, we talked about CeeDee Lamb, where he is projecting for super high rostership percentages. I think he's the best point per dollar wide receiver on the slate, personally. But the rest of the Cowboys' offensive players are projecting for very, very modest to low rostership there. So I really like double stacking or even triple stacking Dak against this Detroit defense that's allowing 34 points a game. The fifth most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks, 7.7 yards per attempt, which is the fourth highest in the league. And Detroit only has 7 sacks so far in 5 games played. So I think there's so many ways you can go. I like Michael Gallup a lot, who played 76% of the snaps for Dallas last week. Dalton Schultz looks like he should be better with that coming back rather than Cooper Rush. Rush was fine, but he's not Dak, and these receivers have the chemistry with him as well. So did I miss anything? I mean, are you with me on that with Dallas? Is there another way that you another piece that I missed maybe for these stacks that you would do?
So this game is particularly tricky for me, right? It's got a nice high total. Everything on paper looks like it should be a favorable one to target, and I think that is going to be heavily targeted indeed. But I'm not sure this ends up being the shootout that most people are presuming that it will be. I think Dallas is in a fantastic position to score points, but I am a little bit worried about this one becoming one-sided. Right? Dallas leads the league in team sacks. I think they're third in the league in pressure applied. They get pressure on like 38.5% of their opponent's dropbacks, and Jared Goff is kind of trash under pressure. Right? He's like completing less than 50% of his passes. So there is a world where I think Dallas gets out to a quick lead and really just locks down the Detroit side of this, and that makes this game really tricky to navigate, right? You know, in order to get up to that big lead, I do think a lot of the names that you mentioned are in a good position to score, namely CD Lamb, right? His price tag is just slightly too low for his role in the offense. I touched a little bit on his matchup earlier. He's going to see a lot of AJ Parker. AJ Parker is, he hasn't played a lot this season, but in his career is someone that is essentially letting almost everything that's thrown his way be hauled in for a reception. Obviously, that's a bit hyperbolic, but just a very, very soft matchup for that slot corner and for really all of the corners that he'll line up against on the Detroit side. So I do think CD's safe. He's certainly on the cash game radar. The player that I think maybe gives the most leverage is Ezekiel Elliott. He had a very good game off of Sunday Night Football against the Eagles last week. I do think that drives his rostership up a little bit. But I'm specifically looking at that Week 5 game against the Rams, where they were able to get a lead and really hold that lead through most of the game. 70% of snaps, ran the ball 22 times. Obviously wasn't nearly as efficient as he was last week, but against the Detroit Lions, I do think if we're seeing 20 plus carries for Ezekiel Elliott, he'll be able to get north of that 4.5 yard per carry range and really put forward a nice day on the ground. So I think Ezekiel Elliott is probably not going to get rostered as much as he probably should, and I kind of like going with the one-sided blowout game script as opposed to the shootout that most people are calling for.
I like it. And, if the game script goes the way you're, possibly, positing that it will, this is the kind of game where he gets multiple touchdowns, right? I mean, they're favored by 7.5 at home. This Lions defense is not just bad against the pass. I mean, they've given up 8 rushing touchdowns already on the ground. And they can just control this game. So yeah, I'm what's that?
So they're just flat bad.
Oh, they're just flat out bad. Yeah, I know. Yeah. I do think that his passing game role is really annoying. The fact that against Washington in Week 4, he had 32 receiving yards. The 5 other games combined, his combined receiving total for those 5 games is 0 yards. So that's worrisome that he is just not involved in the passing game. But I think you're right that this is a game where he doesn't need to be if they get out to a lead and they hold that lead. What about Tony Pollard? Do you have any interest in him?
Not a ton. I'm going to stick to this, at least where I sit now. I'm planning on sticking to this Dallas by a lot game script. I'll probably build some other sides of that coin. And I do think Pollard offers some interesting leverage, right? He's certainly going to be the least rostered of presumably all of the running backs in this game. So whenever that's the case, there's some interest there. I've got him around 6 or 7%. Probably be around that in terms of my exposure as well. But it's really there as a CYA, right? If the circumstance I'm laying out here doesn't play out, I at least want the opposite to be the one that comes to pass. So that'll be the instance by which I'll have Pollard.
Yeah, he's not finding his way into my player pool as of right now. What about the Detroit side? You mentioned a lot of downsides to the Detroit side facing off against this Dallas defense. Are you into Amon-Ra St. Brown? I think if you are stacking Dallas, he is the most natural bring back there, especially with DJ Chark was put on IR. And Josh Reynolds missed most of practice this week as well. St. Brown is practicing fully now, so he looks like he is fully good to go. So are you feeling, if you're stacking Dallas, do you feel the need to come back with him? If it's not him, do you like Swift if he plays? Any other paths to stack in this game on the Detroit side?
Yeah. So I do think St. Brown is the wide receiver to target if you're going to run back with a wideout. He's got a pretty solid matchup overall, right? He lines up in the slot a fair amount, so that'll give him a good deal of Jordan Lewis. Jordan Lewis is allowing 84% of targets thrown his way to be caught. So, should be another kind of high volume day for Amon-Ra St. Brown. Given the way that they use him, if his ADOT comes down a little bit, I wouldn't be surprised, just because I think Jared Goff will have to get the ball out a little bit quicker than in weeks past. But that volume makes him, such a safe play. I do like. Actually, quick note: Josh Reynolds probably plays. He did upgrade to limited on Friday's practice, so at least he's trending in the right direction. That's usually the indicator. But obviously, we'll watch the news. To your question about Swift, I kind of like it. 3 limited practices in a row. So if I had to guess right now, I would speculate that he is going to, in fact, give it a go this week. And kind of the same point that I was making with Amon-Ra St. Brown a moment ago, Jared Goff is probably going to be in a position where he has to get the ball out pretty quickly. We haven't seen DeAndre Swift in this way so often this year, but if you think to some of his best games from last year, they were almost all in the fourth quarter, right? They were down by multiple scores, and literally every single play was a dump off to Swift for 15 or 23 or 30 yards, right? So I wouldn't be
Right.
surprised to see that type of productivity for Swift when it's all said and done. And I think with him being questionable in his first game back in a while, that will draw his rostership down a little bit, right? I've got him around 10% now, which is a number that I'm happy with. I'll probably be overweight to that on my Detroit builds.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. There's ways I think to attack this game which is always what I like for stacking. If there's like a clear path that everybody's going to do, even if the game looks appealing, I tend to stay away just because, you want leverage when you're stacking these games. And if it's clear everyone's going to stack the same way, then I would be looking other ways, which is kind of why this is one of my favorite games on the slate to do, because there's so many ways you can attack it. All right, so that's Dallas, Detroit. We got a few more questions. We're going to move on to our next game first, and then we'll get to those questions in there. I see a DFS question that I really like, and I am going to wait on that one, Scott, because we are going to do that game that you're asking about after this. But let's move on. We have Cincinnati, the Atlanta Falcons at the Cincinnati Bengals. This is going to be one that people are gravitating to as well. Not quite hitting that 50-point mark. We're at about 47 for this game, and that's more an indictment of the Falcons' kind of Bears-like non-passing offense right now than anything else. But this has a good one. So let's start with the one that everyone's going to be looking at first, and that's the Bengals offense. Joe Burrow was last week's QB1 against New Orleans, facing an Atlanta defense that just lost Casey Hayward to IR, and the other cornerback, AJ Terrell, is battling an injury as well. We mentioned Detroit has 7 sacks on the year, which is the worst in the NFL. Atlanta's next at the bottom with 8. That offensive line for Cincinnati is starting to click. I like every piece of this offense as well. Stacking Burrow with Chase and Higgins, even stacking him with Mixon, because he is on pace for career highs in not only touches but targets as well. Atlanta's defense has always given up a lot of receptions to running backs. And even Hayden Hurst, coming off a 10-target game when Higgins himself got 10 targets, I think is a good play here against an Atlanta team that funnels points to the tight ends. How are you attacking the Bengals side, if you are?
Yeah, this one's a bit of a gut punch, specifically with that Hayward news, right? The theme for our coverage of the Falcons through 6.5, 7 weeks now is they're very tough on the outside, funnels a lot of the passing game to the slot and to the tight end. And I thought this was going to set up perfectly for an overlooked Tyler Boyd and Hayden Hurst kind of game. Now that Hayward's out, AJ Terrell's a little nicked up. Honestly, AJ Terrell quite hasn't been playing to the standard that we've held him to, or we've known him to operate at throughout his career. So it's really wide open for the Cincinnati Bengals offense as a whole. So for me, it's going to boil down to rostership. I would suspect that Jamar Chase is probably going to be the more popular of the 2 big receiving options, just given how prolific his week was last week, right? DFS players love to chase last week's production. So I do think it's going to be close, probably like a 14, 12%, 15, 11% kind of thing. But ultimately, if Higgins is going to be the one that is going to be on fewer rosters, he's probably going to be the one that I prioritize. And I will look to get him with one of those ancillary pieces in my Burrow stacks, right? A Higgins and a Boyd, a Higgins and a Mixon, a Higgins and a Hayden Hurst. I do like going two buy on the Cincinnati side, and really every single player for the Bengals is on the board, right? They're all kind of moderately rostered. They're all reasonably priced. So there's a lot of different ways that you can attack this one. Where I'm building, I'm going to look to overload on the Cincinnati side.
I agree. And I'll just point out for Mixon, too, that he, over his last 2 games, is averaging a shade under 6 yards per carry. So, with the touch counts that come his way, at 7,000, I think he's way too cheap. I think you can play him in cash. I think you can play him in GPP as a standalone play. I think you can mix him into all these Bengals stacks that we talked about as well. How about the Atlanta side? That's where it gets a little bit tougher because they, like I said at the beginning, have really, really lowered their passing expectations here. We talked about the Bears all year with Justin Fields, and they're just not letting him throw. Atlanta is the same. Mariota in the 3 wins that they have, he's totaled 53 passes. So do you have to bring back a Bengals stack with a Falcons player? If you do, who would it be? I mean, I would have to think it's between Pitts and London for you.
Yes, it's certainly between Pitts and London. Anyone else that you're looking at on the Atlanta side, you're really just speculating, right? Algier, Huntley. I mean, they're in the midst of a full blown 3-way committee there. Um, and anybody else in terms of the pass catcher, you're really throwing a dart for Atlanta. Honestly, I'm not too worried about Marcus Mariota this week. It's a decent enough matchup, right? He's kind of on the low end of maybe even cash viability at this price tag. He gets so much done with his legs that that floor is pretty safe, right? 50 yards rushing last week, 61 the week before. It's getting a good number of design runs as well. So don't mind having him as a way to save salary in the cash game. But if you look towards the beginning of the season, we've got games where he was attempting 33, 26 passes to open the year. If they find themselves down quickly, I think we could actually see Mariota throwing the ball a little bit more, right? So I'll probably have some GPB builds where I've got Mariota and a London or Mariota and a Pitts in there, and I'm looking to get a couple of runbacks on the Bengals side because I don't think that approach is going to be particularly popular. But it is very much so through the lens of trying to be contrarian, right? I need a very specific game script to play out. His 2 main options are fine with London and with Pitts. I'm basically pot committed on Pitts, so as long as he's not in a terrible matchup or way priced up, he's going to be in my player pool because that day will come. Maybe it'll be next year, but I like his matchup. It's a slight upgrade against the tight end for Pitts against Cincinnati this week.
Yeah, and I'll just point out there, Logan Wilson is out. Their linebacker, who would be the best, coverage player in the middle for Pitts. So yeah, I'd pick Pitts over London as well. And I do like that too. I think you're right. I mentioned that lack of passing attempts that came in their wins, and you're right. If they fall behind the Bengals, which I think they're going to do, he's going to have to throw. They're going to have to try and shoot out with them. So I like that as well. All right, so that is kind of Atlanta, Cincinnati. These are kind of the 3 games that we've really, really latched onto, and we got a 4th one that we're looking at as well, but there's a question on that. So let's go through the questions in the chat quick here, and we will transition from Scott's question, Scott Kobe, who is I did Scott Fishbowl stuff with this year. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, cool.
Where am I going back here? Yep. Dominic Conti, do you guys feel Mac Jones is starting Monday? Honestly, I have no idea. I think it's a 50-50 right now. Do you have any insight that I haven't seen on
I don't
that
have
yet?
anything insightful, but I would guess that he does give it a go. Sounds like he's preparing as though he will be starting. Obviously, it's going to be a game time decision, so we'll see as we get into Monday. But if he's healthy, I do think he gets the job back. Point being,
Yeah, if this is a season long question, I would I would not start him unless Fields is your other quarterback, or you have Zappy as well that you can afford to wait. I hope you're not in that situation. I understand with the bye weeks being what they are, that you might have Josh Allen or Jalen Hurts and are in a pickle there, but I would find someone that started on Sunday, uh, personally, for that, just to make sure. Ron Dreyer. I have Michael Gallup in season long in DFS. I'm also in standard scoring league. I have to start either George Pickens or Bateman, assuming he plays. Any advice? Um, if Bateman plays, for me, he's the answer there. What about you?
in lockstep, if Bateman's going, he's the guy. And this offense is entirely different when he's out there. So like him a lot if he's going to be on the field.
Yeah, me too. Me too. I like the whole Baltimore offense this week if he's going to be on the field, and in some sense, even if he's not. But I mean, he definitely changes the whole dynamic. All right, thank you for that. So we have 10 Jot DK, if I'm saying that right. Cooks or Lockett, half PPR. Keep in mind Lockett has a hamstring injury, but will play. We don't know that yet. We talked about that before. He thinks he's going to play. That'll be a true game time decision. Assuming both play. I mean, assuming both play and are healthy, Lockett is definitely my pick. If we think he's going to be limited, I'm okay going with Cooks there instead of Lockett. What about you on that one?
Yeah, so you have the benefit of the Texans and the Raiders playing at the 4:05 window, so you should be able to interchange these as news comes out. And unless there's specific reporting that Lockett is going to be on a snap count or have some sort of limited role, I would go Lockett's route as well. Brandon Cooks doesn't really have the best matchup. We'll talk a little bit later as we break down the game, but might be a tough outing for Cooks.
Yeah, and I'll point out we haven't really touched on this game yet that Nico Collins has actually passed him in both yardage and air yards for the Texans, which has got to be at least a little bit concerning for that Houston offense that isn't looking good outside at all outside of Damian Pierce, which I was way off on preseason. But so yeah, I think we both unlock it there. All right, next one, Scott. I'm skipping yours because we're going to use yours to transition here. Kyle Grove, full PPR trade offer, trade away Rashad Bateman and AJ Dillon, receive Keenan Allen. Is that enough for you? Is that too much for an injured player right now for you, Eric?
Yeah, I think it probably is right, especially with Keenan Allen kind of hinting that we might not see him until week 9, right? Just a few more weeks of trying to tread water at the position. Again, I like Bateman a lot when he's out there. He could be out there as soon as this week, and I don't think what we've seen from AJ Dillon is representative of the value that he will hold down the stretch run, what he'll be when the season is all told. So, I actually like the Bateman and Dillon side.
I agree. I wouldn't do that one. Okay, so Scott Kobe. All right, so Scott, we're going to transition into this Miami Pittsburgh game there. So Scott's question is, do you guys like a Dolphins stack of Tua, Waddle, and Tyreek and run it back with Claypool or Pickens? So let's use that question to go right into this game. And Eric, you had indicated that you definitely have some interest in this game from a DFS perspective. So I'll kind of let you take lead on this one. Is that how you're doing it? The Dolphins, this is the Sunday night game, bear in mind. So if you're playing this game, you're not on the main slate. You're either doing the showdown or you're doing the full DFS slate, Monday or Sunday through Monday, or I don't think they have Sunday through Sunday night anymore. So this is the Sunday through Monday thing if you're playing fully or if you've already started on the Thursday. How are you approaching this game? And we'll keep this one short since it's not on the main slate.
Yeah, yeah. With this being the primetime game, we'll keep it short. everyone on the Dolphins side of the ball is in the Dolphins side of the passing game is in a fantastic position. Tyreek Hill specifically has the most favorable matchup. Like we did with the Ravens a few weeks back. Love going to a Hill and Waddle. Their price tags make that a very interesting three-way stack. The run back is the question mark. Assuming that we see Kenny Pickett, I'll go with George Pickens. I mean, over the course of 2.25 of a game sample size, the chemistry there is real, right? He is looking for George Pickens. He throws the ball a lot, so I think this game is all the better if Kenny Pickett is out there, just from a pace of play standpoint. And assuming that he is, I'll go with Pickens on the run back.
All right, there you go. So that is the Miami-Pittsburgh stack in a nutshell there. Thank you for that question, Scott, and thank you, Eric, for breaking that down for us. We're going to move along with our game script here. We have probably about 25 minutes left here. We're going to try and get to all these if we can. So let's go to, this is an interesting one, and I'll be the first to admit, and we talked about that this morning, Jordan and I as well. I'm having a tough time getting a beat on this one. And the fact that Christian McCaffrey has been acquired by the 49ers, if he plays, I'm actually having an even tougher time with this game. So we've got the Chiefs 49ers. This is an over-under of 49 right now. The Chiefs have a 26 team total. Last I saw, 49ers had a 23, but that may have risen with the acquisition of McCaffrey. From the Chiefs side, I mean, I'll kind of kick this off with the Chiefs side here. I do think there's merit to a Chiefs stack in GPP. I think people are going to look on paper and see that San Francisco has the top ranked defense, and they're going to see all those red numbers on DraftKings, and they're just going to say, well, the Chiefs price tags aren't worth it this week. But bear in mind that Azeez Al-Shaair is on IR, Emmanuel Mosley's on IR, Javon Kinlaw's on IR. Charvarius Ward is doubtful if he hasn't already been ruled out for this game. Nick Bosa looks like he's going to play, which is a very good addition back to the San Francisco defense, but it is a groin injury, so you don't know if he's limited or not. Eric Armstead is limited as well. So this is kind of, I guess, the best spot you're ever going to find this 49ers defense. And with a Chiefs offense, they could always do stuff with Mahomes. So I don't think I would do too many ridiculous things with the Chiefs stack, but I'm okay going Mahomes, Kelsey, just right out of the gate there. If you want to double stack, throwing Juju in as well. Not interested in the running backs just because it's such a hot hand approach, and I'm not interested in any of the other wide receivers here for KC. What about you for the Chiefs side?
Yeah, this one actually looks to be kind of interesting for me. For all of the the points that you laid out, specifically the strength of the San Francisco defense and how that's going to look on paper to be a tough matchup for the Chiefs. That's in our favor, right? If you look at just sort by rostership for this game in particular, there are hardly any guys that are pushing 8 or 9%. Usually that's not the case for Kansas City, right? Whenever they're on the slate, they usually have some of the most highly rostered guys. So because of that, I'm actually really interested in this game. All you have to do is go back to last week where it was essentially a mash unit for the 49ers defense, and Atlanta had one of their better offensive games of the season against that unit. It's going to be a pretty similar set of circumstances for the Chiefs this week. We'll see ultimately who's going to be out there. I think Eric Armstead has been ruled out. A lot of guys looking very, very questionable for tomorrow. So if I can get into a game that should score up with very prolific pieces that are going to be under rostered, that's absolutely the circumstance by which I want to do it. Really, the only red flag for me is with regard to Juju. He'll see a fair amount of Charvarius Ward. That's a pretty tough out matching up in the slot there. So, if I'm trying to get leverage off of a Kelsey build, or I'm looking for a second piece to trot out there with them, probably going to be looking more on the MVS or Mecole Hardman side. Maybe even getting a little bit tricky with Sky Moore. His snaps and his opportunities have been walking up week over week, but ultimately, I really like this game relative to how much attention it seems to not be getting out there in the world.
Yeah, and that's kind of the way that I was approaching it too. It's just I'm having a tough time latching on to how I want. I mean, you outlined some good plays there. What about the San Francisco side of things? I mean, it seemed kind of clear the way to go with this, and then they shook the Twitter world, with the McCaffrey deal. How are you? How are you dealing with the San Francisco side of this thing if you're
Yeah,
stacking?
there's gonna there's gonna be a lot of people that are still reeling for McCaffrey not going for multiple first round picks, right? Because this is real football and not dynasty fantasy football. I do think it creates kind of an interesting opportunity, right? My builds where I'm going to be focusing on this game, I'm going to be multi entering, and I'm really just going to be balancing exposures, right? There are a lot of question marks in terms of how Christian McCaffrey affects Debo's role, how Christian McCaffrey affects Jeff Wilson's role, right? So I'll want to get those guys just kind of rotating into my exposure overall. I do think a couple things feel really unchanged with the acquisition of Christian McCaffrey, right? This week, I think we probably see Christian McCaffrey. I don't think we see him play a full complement of snaps. So really, the impact on Brandon Ayuk should be minimal. So he's a player that I'm going to prioritize. And honestly, unless there's reporting out that says that Christian McCaffrey is going to see significant work in his first game for the 49ers, I really like Jeff Wilson this week. Kansas City Chiefs are allowing the fifth most fantasy points per game to opposing running backs. They're giving up a ton of yards per carry, a fair amount of yards after contact, right? So a lot of the things that Jeff Wilson does fairly well. And because Christian McCaffrey is lurking out there, especially if it's announced that he's going to play, I mean, Jeff Wilson might be sub 2% rostered, right? So, in this game that is one of the highest totals where, finding a unique way to get into it, Jeff Wilson might be that silver bullet as long as there's not reporting that this is CMC's job now and Jeff Wilson is going to be on the sideline.
Yeah, so we're going to be watching for that. We're going to be watching for that for sure. But I mean, I have to think there's merit to what you're saying, just because you got to learn a playbook. This is not baseball.
It
You
was like
can't.
4 days ago, right?
Yeah, you can't just step up to the plate and see this. The same thing, or basketball even. I mean, it's football's a different game with that stuff. So I think there's merit to what you're saying there. I also really like Kittle this week. This is the first time all year that I've been interested in George Kittle, and I'm always lower than the field on this guy just because his injury always makes it spotty, but also the fact that he's such a good blocker that anytime there's anything going on with their offensive line, which there has been recently, they always put him into block because, I mean, he basically is a left tackle. They're getting back Trent Williams this week. He's off the injury report entirely. So Kittle can be used as a wide receiver a lot more this week. He had 10 targets last week. I think in this game, we could really see him get leaned on over the middle of the field there. So he's someone that I'm targeting as well in GPPs. And I don't even mind the dreaded double tight end stack if you wanted a Mahomes-Kelsey thing, bringing that back with Kittle.
That's really the only time by which I would do it, right? Kittle and Kelsey are two of really 3 or 4 tight ends that can get you enough ceiling, enough top end exposure to be viable in DFS. So not necessarily mad at that double tight end build. For me, I'm always worried about how much pass volume there's going to be coming out of San Francisco to support these kind of secondary pieces, right? So not I'll have them in the pool because I want to be on this game, but I'll probably be a little underweight on Kittle.
Yeah, yeah, and just to point out before we move on to if you are using those double tight end games, just as an example this week, it doesn't pay because we have some of these sub 3,000 tight ends this week. It doesn't pay to use them with Kelsey. Like, that's not the build. You're using Kelsey or Mark Andrews because you don't want to be in that range. It's just it's really defeating the purpose if you're building those things to use that double tight end stack with one cheap and one expensive. That's not the way to go to complete your builds. Would you be in agreement on that?
Absolutely, yeah. You're not going to get enough ceiling out of those sub 4K guys to really make it viable at all.
No, agreed. All right, so moving on, we got about what am I doing? 15 minutes left here. We're going to try and get through every game here. We got 6 left. We're going to go a little bit rapid fire. Before we do, I'm going to tee up the next game. I got a question on there from Bungalow Joe. Eric, I'll let you take this one. Trade away Mixon for Pierce and Keenan Allen. What do you think on that one? No indication on PPR or standard or anything. Mixon for Dameon Pierce and Keenan Allen.
Yeah, assuming this is redraft and assuming that you have a need at wide receiver, I think it's a fine deal, right? It's fair enough. It just kind of boils down to team need specifically. So if Keenan Allen represents a considerable upgrade there, I think it's worth a bit of a step down going from Mixon to Pierce.
Agreed, and I think it's worth pointing out also that Pierce has had his bye already and Mixon hasn't, so you won't have to deal with that at all. So I like that
Stealing
trade
that
as well.
week.
Yep, which goes a long way. All right, so thank you for that question. Moving on to the Colts and Titans. This is a pretty straightforward game with two fairly condensed offenses, but it's a good AFC South matchup with a 2.5 point spread, low team total or low over under at 42.5. Real quick on the Titans side, I'm not interested in anyone over there outside of Derrick Henry in GPPs, and even he is kind of reaching because I'm looking more at the Eckler range if I'm in there, but I'm fine with Derrick Henry and GPP. And anybody else on the Titans side for you in any format?
I mean, if you're gonna build on this game, Robert Woods can be in the pool, but no one to really get excited about, right? This game kind of screams, or at least the Tennessee side kind of screams, last guy into the build sort of territory.
Right, yeah. So the Colts side is a little bit more intriguing to me. The Titans defense has allowed the third most fantasy points per game to opposing quarterbacks. So Jonathan Taylor is returning. It looks like Nyheim Hines is also. So they're going to be full strength here. You can make the argument that hurts Ryan, that they can lean more on Taylor and on the run in this one. But it is a soft matchup for the pass. I will say, I'll kind of let you touch on things. I will say the one player that I'm really interested in here in all formats is Alec Pierce, who played 65% of snaps last week. His usage is rising tremendously with each week. Even with Pittman having 23 more targets than him on the season, the Tennessee has allowed the most fantasy points per game to wide receivers. So I like Pierce a lot in both cash and GPP. I think Pittman's fine, although a bit pricey. What are you thinking about this side of the game?
So this one's tricky. This is the second time we've had this matchup. When we talked about it in week 4, I personally was gloating about how soft this Tennessee defense was, really against all positions, and they proceeded to immediately get out to a big lead and just throw my game script out the window. This week we now have a larger sample size. The Titans look to be a bit better against the run, so probably not looking to get Jonathan Taylor into the mix in his first week back quite yet. I do worry about how this impacts the overall game plan for the Colts, right? If the game script that I laid out 3 weeks ago, comes to pass, it's going to be a lot more ground game. We're not going to see Matt Ryan attempting 50 passes again, and if he's not, these secondary pieces like Alec Pierce do become a little bit risky, right? If they fall behind, if Matt Ryan is chucking the ball around the field, then there's a lot to like about Pierce at his roughly 4K price tag. Pittman's fine, a little bit expensive, but gets the volume to where he should have a good path to value. But ultimately, I mean, these AFC South divisional games specifically all seem to be just absolute dogfights. They seem to really come out of left field with how they end up playing out. And those are all things that I try to avoid in my DFS builds.
Yeah, I'm with you on that one as well. So, I mean, this is, it's tough. Like when real football and fantasy collide, it's tough to get a beat on that as far as, where to get the production goes at. But we're going to move along here. Our next game, this is one of the most one-sided affairs that you're probably going to see this year. Tampa Bay Bucks and the Carolina Panthers. Carolina having traded away Christian McCaffrey. There is no interest at all for anybody. There should not be any interest. I shouldn't say that. DJ Moore is 4,900. So we'll stop on him real quick. I'm curious. Is he making any of your builds? I mean, that's so cheap for someone of his caliber.
No, he's really not. The price tag is very very enticing, but this
Mhm.
Tampa Bay defense is very stout, and it looks like we are going to have might have already been verified at this point. PJ Walker back under center, who looked
Mhm.
like his old self last week against a Rams defense that isn't nearly as good as this Buccaneers one. So, DJ Moore should see a fair amount of targets. How many of those are actually on target and can be hauled in is a different story altogether. And it's just a very, very risky play to fire up anyone in a Panthers uniform.
Trivia question for you. Do you know what PJ Walker's average depth of target was last week to the Rams?
I don't. I will guess 7.6 yards.
It was negative yardage, negative a dot.
Oh, beautiful.
So, yep, he's
Curtis
in rare
Samuel
air
is
there.
somewhere smiling.
What's that?
Curtis Samuel is smiling somewhere.
Yep, yep. I mean, that's you got to try for that. No, so yeah, no. This is real quick just on this game because we're running out of time here. I don't want to get to every game, but I mean, I think anybody on the Bucks is viable here. If you get angry Brady, I love Leonard Fournette in this against Carolina, giving up the fifth most fantasy points per game to running backs. He's already averaging 21.2 touches per game. Um, this is one of those rare occasions where I think it's viable to pay up for the defense, but Russell Wilson getting ruled out is making the 2,600 Jets mega chalk, so that's where I'm going in cash. But in GPP, I for sure you can pay up for the Bucks defense and pair him with Fournette. Don't pair him with Fournette. I can't imagine Carolina scores a touchdown in this game. They'll get 3-6 points, something along those lines, if that. All right, so let's move right along here. The Raiders and the Houston Texans, there's some viable intrigue here. Both teams coming off a bye, so both are fresh, both have losing records, so that we're going to kind of see where they stand as far as this goes. Give me your overall kind of synopsis of this game and where you stand on it.
Yeah, so this is Josh Jacobs' mega chalk week, right? He's going to push for 30% rostered, um, uh, even in tournament context, and rightfully so. He's too cheap for his role in the offense. Houston is an absolute turnstile against the run, allowing 131 yards rushing per game to running backs specifically. So Josh Jacobs should absolutely feast in tournaments. That's just too much ownership for me to really stomach. We look at the passing game for these Raiders. Derek Carr's in a decent spot. I don't know if this game's going to score enough to where I want to really try to build around it. But if I'm trying to be weird, some Derek Carr and Devontae Adams stacks. Maybe sprinkling in a little Mac Hollins or Darren Waller could be viable. Really, just about everybody on the Las Vegas side is in either a neutral or a plus matchup. The big storyline is just how popular Josh Jacobs is going to be and how you either live with that or leverage off of that.
Yeah, it looks like he's going to be the highest rostered player right now at any position. And that includes Kenneth Walker, who we touched on earlier. In cash, he's absolutely going to be in my lineup. And I actually have him as my overall RB2 this week right now on half PPR on Fantasy Pros. So I'm buying, and I wrote about him extensively in the preseason. This is the one W that I'm hanging my hat on for the
Yes.
preseason takes, and I'm parlaying it into DFS as well. So 6,500, I'm not fading him. The Houston side is a little trickier because Davis Mills is. I think we can see that he's not it for them. But Dameon Pierce looks like he certainly could be. Are you interested in Pierce in any context in this?
Yeah, Pierce is a little interesting. Specifically, in the context of the guy on the other side of the line of scrimmage, right? They're essentially the same price, 6.4K, 6.5K for Josh Jacobs. Pierce is going to come in on about half as many rosters, right? 15% owned or so. So right there is an interesting spot to get some leverage off of Josh Jacobs in a tournament context. Um, Playing them both together is not really something that's ever going to interest me, but might be an interesting way to approach it. So I'll have Dameon Pierce in the pool. I do like getting him in there and running back with a correlated Devontae Adams play, for example. But ultimately, not going to be anywhere near 15% of my exposure for Dameon Pierce. He's got a fine matchup. That volume just makes him really makes or breaks everything for him. So if he's going to get as many touches as he does, I do think he needs to be in the mix at 6.4K.
Yeah, and I'll just go back to one thing that I had said earlier. We talked about those sub 3 tight ends, but I realized we didn't really highlight them. So I just want to do a couple. One of them is in this game. Darren Waller is out, so Foster Moreau is in. So he can certainly be your cash tight end at 2,800. And then the last game we just did, Cade Otton is one as well at 2,700 with Cameron Brate ruled out. He got 94% of snaps with Brate out the last time, and he went to 7 targets. And we were on in that game as well, and he passed by the expectations that we were hoping he was going to get from there. So I'll kind of transition into the next one here. The Jets at Denver. The other one there, from a cheap tight end perspective, is Greg Dulcich, who is the minimum price, 2,500 after kind of breaking onto the scene a little bit last game. With Russell Wilson ruled out, I think he falls to a distant third for me among these 3 tight ends, but 2,500 starter at tight end is certainly viable in any format. So on that note, Twitter has been joking all day that this is a QB upgrade for the Broncos. Poor Russell Wilson. And you should start all Broncos guys and upgrade the offense. I understand the joke. I do not think it is a viable take. I will be playing the Jets defense. I will not be playing any of the Denver skill positions. Anything else on this game that you want to talk about or disagree with me on?
I am one of the people who was putting my tongue into my cheek and making fun of Brett Ripien being an upgrade over
I saw
Russell
it.
Wilson. I do think we'll learn a little bit about what's going on in Denver, right? If it's a Russ thing, if it is a Nathaniel Hackett thing, right? Dulcich is kind of interesting. We've seen a history of second string players having a bit of chemistry whenever they're both elevated in the starting position. So certainly a viable punt play, but really, this Jet secondary is trouble, right? I talked about Sauce Gardner last week. He's an absolute menace in the secondary. DJ Reed is a tough out too. So really not looking for any of the wide receiver options for the Broncos. By combination of their matchups and their backup quarterback throwing them passes.
Yep. All right, so we got about 5 minutes left, so I don't want to leave any of these games out in case there's some viable plays. We got 2 games left. I'll let you take Cleveland and Baltimore. I'll take the lead on Giants, Jacksonville, and we'll give our best options there as quick as we can. So Cleveland, Baltimore, where are you on this game from a quick cash and GPP perspective?
Yeah, so Baltimore's in a pretty good matchup, right? Mark Andrews, Lamar Jackson, both very safe plays from a cash perspective. Like we talked about earlier, if Rashad Bateman is back, I do like this offense a whole lot more. The running back room for the Ravens is in a bit of turmoil. Kenyon Drake should be out there. I haven't seen whether or not we can expect Gus Edwards to see significant workload, but as per usual, the Ravens have a ton of running backs, and playing any of them is going to be a bit risky. On the Cleveland side, unfortunately, Wyatt Teller has been ruled out. He missed a good chunk of time back in 2020, and basically every single rushing stat, all rushing efficiency, just completely plummeted for this Browns team. So Nick Chubb is a very dangerous play. Kareem Hunt sort of shouldn't have been on the radar anyways, but certainly shouldn't be in this circumstance. I do think we see Jacoby Brissett throw the ball a fair amount because that running game is going to be so ineffective, kind of becomes a bit of a pass funnel. So apart from like pass attempt props for Jacoby Brissett, not really looking to get any action on the Brown side of this one.
Yep, I agree with you on that as well. And so, real quick, we're going to go to the Giants Jacksonville. I'll throw in my quick takes, and if I'm leaving out anything, feel free to put it in there. From the Giants side, the fan in me is thrilled as what's going on there. The fantasy, I kind of put Daniel Jones on when I interviewed with the 33rd team earlier today. I kind of put Daniel Jones on there as my sneaky. You can play him in large field tournaments as a $5,100 quarterback by himself with nobody else, because Jacksonville is vulnerable to the rushing quarterback. And if they do those bootleg plays that they were doing against a similar defense like the Bears, I think we could see Daniel Jones get a multiple rushing touchdown game off of potential Saquon Barkley leverage there. I think the sensible play is to use Barkley and really nobody else from the Giants offense, although Wan'Dale Robinson at 4,500 does command some PPR respect. From the Jacksonville side, I'm not too interested in anybody else too much right here. I do think Travis Etienne at 5,400 has some GPP appeal, especially if you are, I think, I played Wan'Dale in a couple of GPPs there, and I think he's the natural kind of bring back on there because they do struggle in coverage as far as the running backs out of the backfield. They showed that with McCaffrey, who we've spoken about, even like a player like Dontrell Hilliard for Tennessee. So I see you pumping your fist. So give me a last bit on ETN before we sign off here, or anybody else on Jacksonville.
Yeah, I like ETN a lot. I'm actually kind of surprised. It looks like he's going to be more popular than James Robinson even. So the hype machine has finally arrived. I do think it's a very good matchup for him. The Giants are allowing 10 yards per catch to opposing running backs. So with the way they use him, with how dynamic he's looked in the open field, could be a pretty big game for him. Going back to the Giant side, love the Daniel Jones call. I think he's fourth or fifth in the league in designed runs for quarterbacks. So they should continue to take advantage of a soft spot in the Jacksonville defense. I also like Daniel Bellinger a little bit. He's a few $100s more than those kind of 3K or sub 3K tight ends that we talked about. But I actually think that he's in a decent position to run a ton of routes again and potentially push for the second most targets on this team. Not necessarily in on Wan'Dale yet. It was like 11 or 12 routes that he ran last week, right? Like I want to see him take a bigger role in this offense before I'm gonna have too much exposure to him in DFS.
Yeah, sure. I mean, and for me, it's really just a matter of that there's nobody else for that right now. Galladay is a waste, and Tony can't get on the field either. So, he might just be out of necessity. But yeah, I'm with you there. All right, so that is going to do it for us. Thank you all for joining us again for this edition of the DFS show. We'll be back with you week 8. I haven't looked ahead to see who the bye weeks are, but I think there's even more teams. Like there's 6 teams off instead of the 4 we have this week. I could be totally wrong on that. Eric, any last thing you want to throw in before we sign off?
Football Diehards on Sirius XM channel 88. I think they're simulcast on the 87 too. Jamie, I don't know if you're specifically heading over there, but that's your normal spot. If you're not, go listen to our friends Bob over on the Football Diehards.
I am. I'm going on there in 5 minutes with those guys to talk more DFS. So that'll be my plug for right now.
Go check them all out. It's a great show.
Yep, and check out all the great content that we have over at Football Diehards. Please, Eric and I can be tweeted at. We'll be answering questions on Twitter all tomorrow. You can just talk football with us. We're on there all day. So join us. Eric, a pleasure to talk football with you again. We'll see you back here the same time next Saturday, 9 p.m. Eastern, talking Week 8 football. For Eric at Fantasy Nav, I'm Jamie at JAC3600, signing off.